Welcome to Unit 12 of Introduction to Apologetics. Perhaps you've been sharing the gospel with someone before, talking to them about Christianity, or maybe you haven't even gotten to that point yet, but you run into someone in a coffee shop, strike up a conversation. In that conversation, you share that you're a Christian or that you're a pastor, that you work for a church. And what I found in my experience from being a pastor, being in ministry, is that whenever I bring this up with somebody, they often, especially if they're an unbeliever, they often feel the need to explain to me why they're not in church. And very often they'll say, I grew up in church, but then I went to college and I learned these things, and then I fell out of the faith. The story might sound very differently, but maybe you've been in a situation like this before. You share that you are in ministry or that you are in school for ministry, and the person says something to you along the lines of, well, you see, I can never be a Christian, and it's really hard for me to believe in your God because I don't understand how a good and all-powerful God, like you claim to believe in, could allow a world like ours, which is filled with so much evil, suffering, and misery. An objection like this usually tends to stop us in our tracks, to kind of silence us and really make it hard for us to respond. What this response from that person is called is a defeater. And in this unit, we're going to be learning about some of the primary defeaters that are floating around in our culture that you will most often encounter with people. In fact, you will be learning about 8 different defeaters against Christianity in this chapter. What we mean by a defeater is a short objection raised against Christian belief, which is intended to be a defeating objection, which is intended to silence you. In this chapter, you'll be learning about those, and you'll also be learning about how to apply the inside-out method to these various different defeaters. So I think it will be encouraging for you because you'll probably be getting deja vu as you read this chapter and reading about the different 8 defeaters that are brought up. You're going to be reminded of times that you've heard these either personally said to you or said on the news, said on TV, and you're going to see how the gospel can be applied even to these what are seemingly defeating objections. Your assignments for this week are to read chapter 12. Let me give you a heads up. Chapter 12 is the longest in the book because to cover 8 defeaters well, they needed to take some space. And so prepare yourself for that. Carve out a little bit of extra time, particularly not just because it's the longest chapter in the book, but because oftentimes these defeaters might take a little bit more mental work for us to grasp deeply and then to understand how to respond to. So invest some time into your reading this week. Read chapter 12. Take your quiz based upon chapter 12, the defeaters that you'll be learning about. And then you'll also have a discussion board post as a part of your assignments for this week where you will be writing about the different defeaters that you've been learning about, specifically responding to the example that I brought up a moment ago, which is the problem of evil defeater. So invest some serious time into your assignments for this week. It will bear great fruit for you in your ministry. Remember, this chapter and unit is so important because what you will find in doing personal evangelism and apologetics is that you're going to encounter these defeaters all the time. All the time. You remember several units ago when we talked about the debris that usually exists in the pathway between a lost person and meeting Jesus as their Savior? Very often what you're going to find is that that pathway is littered with the defeaters that you're going to be reading about in this chapter. Since you're going to be encountering these all the time, understand that without some preparation, these defeaters very well may do to you exactly what they're designed to do, which is to silence you. Invest some time into what we are learning about here. I hope that by investing the time into diligent study and writing this week that you would gain a good understanding of both these objections, which we call defeaters, and how to respond to them in the inside-out approach, that you would be equipped to be able to remove debris from the pathway to Christ for people who are in your community? Let's jump in.